It started as just another quiet night at home. My little sister Emily was getting ready for bed, brushing her teeth, and humming some random song like she always did. Our golden retriever, Max, lay curled up at the foot of her bed, his usual spot. Everything was perfectly normal until Emily froze. She had bent down to grab her stuffed bunny from under the bed when she suddenly stopped moving. Her whole body tensed up, and she let out this weird, shaky breath. I was walking past her room when I noticed she wasn't moving. "Emily?" I asked. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. I think something's under my bed." At first, I thought she was just being dramatic. She was always letting her imagination run wild, especially at night. I sighed, stepping into the room. "It's probably just a sock or one of your toys," I said, getting down on one knee. But before I could even lean down to check, Max suddenly lifted his head. His ears perked up, and his whole body stiffened. He let out a low, deep growl, one I had never heard before. Max wasn't an aggressive dog. He barely even barked when the mailman came, but right now he looked completely different. His fur stood on end, and his growl got even lower. He wasn't just staring at Emily, he was staring directly at the dark space under the bed. Emily clung to my arm. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. My heart was already racing, but I listened closely. At first there was nothing, just silence. But then a faint sound, a slow, dragging noise, almost like something shifting against the floor. It was so quiet I thought I might be imagining it. Max moved then. He got up, positioning himself protectively in front of Emily. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He just stood there, unmoving, watching, growling. It was like he was waiting for something. I didn't want to believe it, but the way Max was acting made my stomach twist. Something felt wrong. My instincts screamed at me to just grab Emily and get out of there. But before I could even make a move, Max did something that sent a chill straight down my spine. He took a step forward, then stopped. His growl faded, replaced by something even worse. A deep, low whimper. And that's when we heard it. A noise from under the bed, something breathing. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. Neither did Emily. We just stood there, frozen, staring at Max as he whimpered, his body still tense. The room felt colder somehow, like the air had shifted. My heart pounded in my chest, so loud I was sure whatever was under the bed could hear it. Emily gripped my arm even tighter. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. I nodded, barely able to swallow. I wanted to tell her it was just her imagination, that maybe the sound was coming from outside or the pipes in the walls. But I knew better. Max wouldn't be acting like this over nothing. For a second, I considered reaching down, just lifting the edge of the blanket and taking a quick look. But something in my gut told me not to. It was that same feeling you get when you're walking home alone at night and suddenly feel like someone's watching you. A deep, unsettling instinct that warns you. Something isn't right. Max took another slow step forward, his paws barely making a sound on the wooden floor. His body was still rigid, every muscle tight. I had never seen him like this before. I knew he was trying to protect us, but the way he was acting, it was almost like he wasn't sure if he should attack or run. And then the breathing sound came again. A little louder this time. Emily whimpered and buried her face in my side. I could feel her trembling. I forced myself to move, slowly reaching for the lamp on her nightstand. My fingers fumbled over the switch. Maybe if I turned on more light, we'd see that it was nothing. Maybe it was just the AC vent under the bed, or some toy that had fallen and was making noise. Click. The warm glow of the lamp flooded the room. Max flinched, but didn't take his eyes off the bed. I hesitated, then finally dropped to my knees. "Don't!" Emily pleaded, gripping my sleeve. But I had to. I had to know. My hand trembled as I reached down, my fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be brave, then lifted it just an inch. The space under the bed was dark. Too dark. The light from the lamp should have reached at least part of the floor, but it was like the shadows had thickened, like something was swallowing the light. And then something moved. 40. My breath caught in my throat. I swore I saw it. Just the faintest shift in the shadows, like something had pulled back, retreating deeper into the darkness. My fingers clenched the blanket, and for a second I thought about yanking it down and running. But I couldn't. Max let out another low whimper, his body pressing closer to Emily. She was shaking against me, her nails digging into my arm. "Close it," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." But I couldn't look away. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it just a trick of the light? Was I imagining things because I was scared? Or was something really there? And then, tap. A soft, deliberate sound against the wooden floor. My stomach flipped. It wasn't random. It wasn't the house settling. It was a tap, like fingers pressing against the floor, testing, waiting. My body locked up. I wanted to move, but I felt trapped, like the moment I looked away, something would reach out. I tightened my grip on Emily's hand. Then the breathing returned, closer this time, and whatever was under the bed was no longer hiding. 40 Max let out a sharp, warning bark, his entire body tense as he stepped in front of Emily. The sound was loud, too loud in the eerie silence of the room. My heart pounded, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run, to grab my sister and get out. But I couldn't move. I was still crouched there, my hand gripping the blanket, my breath coming out in shallow gasps. Then another tap. Closer. This time, it wasn't just a single sound. It was followed by a slow, dragging noise, like something shifting, repositioning itself beneath the bed. I didn't dare lift the blanket any higher, but I could feel it. The presence. The weight of something just inches away from my face. Emily whimpered, hiding behind me, her grip tightening around my arm. "What do we do?" she whispered. I had no idea. My body was frozen between two instincts, fight or flight. But Max made the choice for me. With a sudden burst of energy, he lunged forward, his paws scratching against the wood as he barked wildly. His growl was different now, no longer cautious but furious, protective. And then, the worst sound yet. A deep, guttural hiss. It came from under the bed. Max stopped barking, his whole body stiffened. For the first time that night, he hesitated, his tail, usually wagging, tucked between his legs. He let out a whimper, his ears pinned back, and then, before I could even react, the bed frame shook. Just for a second, just enough to make my stomach drop. Something was moving, something was about to come out, and we were still trapped inside the room. 40. The bed frame rattled again, harder this time. The sound sent a jolt of fear straight through me. Max took a step back, his body tense, torn between protecting us and running. My breath hitched as the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The air felt heavier, pressing down on my chest like a weight. Emily let out a shaky breath, gripping my arm so tightly it hurt. "We need to go," she whispered. Her voice was barely there, like she was afraid that whatever was under the bed would hear her. I nodded, my mind screaming at me to grab her and get out of the room. But just as I started to move, something changed. The space under the bed, that thick, unnatural darkness, began to shift. It wasn't just shadows anymore. It was something alive. I could feel it watching us. And then Emily gasped, not in fear but in recognition. "No," she mumbled under her breath. I turned to her, my pulse racing. "What?" Her eyes were wide, locked on the darkness under the bed. Her face had gone pale. I've seen it before." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "Last night, I woke up and I thought I saw something in the corner of my room. I thought it was a dream. But then Max started growling, just like now. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just happening tonight. Whatever was under the bed had been here before, watching, waiting. Max let out a low, warning growl, his body trembling slightly. He wasn't just scared, he was terrified. That's when I realized something even worse, the breathing. It wasn't just coming from under the bed anymore, it was behind us. A slow, rattling exhale, like air being dragged through clenched teeth. The sound was so close I could feel the warmth of it against my neck. My entire body locked up, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. Emily's eyes widened, her lips parting in silent terror. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me not to look, but I had to. Slowly, heart hammering, I turned my head, just enough to see the mirror on Emily's wall. And in the reflection, I saw it. Not just a shadow, not just a trick of the light, a figure, standing right behind us. My breath caught in my throat. The figure in the mirror was tall, its shape barely human. The longer I stared, the less sense it made. Its limbs looked stretched, too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes, hollow, empty, like deep black voids sucking in the dim light from Emily's lamp. Emily let out a choked sob, clinging to me as I felt my body go numb. I wanted to move, to scream, to do anything, but my limbs refused to listen. Max let out a sharp, desperate bark, snapping me back into reality. I spun around. The space behind us was empty. Nothing was there. But the mirror. The reflection remained. The figure was still standing there, watching us. Max lunged. He ran straight toward the mirror, barking wildly, his paws skidding against the floor. Just as he reached it, the mirror shattered. The explosion of glass sent shards flying in every direction. Emily shrieked, covering her face as I instinctively pulled her down, shielding her. Max yelped, jumping back as sharp fragments rained around him. For a second, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears, the rapid pounding of my heart. Then, silence. I forced myself to look up. The mirror was gone, nothing but broken pieces scattered across the floor, the figure gone, the breathing gone. The unnatural weight in the air had lifted. It was as if whatever had been watching us had vanished with the glass. Emily sobbed against me, her small body shaking. "It's over," she whispered. I didn't know. My hands were still trembling. Max whined softly, sniffing the shards of glass, his tail cautiously wagging. I let out a shaky breath, forcing myself to believe it was done, that whatever had been under the bed, in the mirror, had disappeared. But then, something caught my eye. Among the shattered glass, one piece remained intact, a jagged, sharp fragment reflecting the dim glow of the lamp. And in that reflection, just for a split second, I saw it. A shadow, not behind me, not in the room, but in the mirror, still watching, still waiting. And then, just like that, it was gone. The room felt too quiet now, like the air had been sucked out of it. My hands were still shaking as I helped Emily sit up, brushing pieces of glass away from her. Max stayed close, his ears twitching, his eyes still darting around, as if he expected something else to happen. Emily sniffled, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her pajama shirt. "It's really gone?" she asked, her voice small. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that it was over, that whatever had been in the mirror was never coming back. But I wasn't sure. That last glimpse in the broken glass had felt too real, too deliberate, like a final warning. I stood up carefully, stepping around the shattered pieces. The mirror frame still hung on the wall, empty now, nothing but a few jagged edges of glass clinging to it. I swallowed hard. "We need to get out of here," I finally said. Emily nodded, grabbing my hand as I led her out of the room. Max followed closely behind, his tail still low, his body tense. I turned off the lamp, casting the room into darkness. For a split second, as I shut the door behind me, I had the eerie feeling that something was still inside, waiting in the shadows. Neither of us slept in our own rooms that night. Emily curled up on the couch next to me, Max lying protectively at our feet. Every creak in the house made me jump, every shadow on the wall made my skin crawl. But nothing else happened. The next morning, I went back into her room. The broken glass was still on the floor, a reminder that it hadn't been a dream. I grabbed a trash bag and carefully picked up each shard, my hands trembling slightly. But when I got to the largest piece, the one where I'd seen that final shadow, I hesitated. The reflection looked normal now. Just my face staring back at me, exhausted but real. No darkness, no figure watching from the other side. I exhaled, finally letting go of the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe it really was over. Maybe whatever had been there was gone for good. Still, as I dropped the last piece of glass into the bag and tied it shut, I couldn't shake the feeling that some things don't just disappear, some things wait. 40.